Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzy Ostwald. Some religious leaders blame a decline in church attendance on outdated worship practices. As a result, many churches today use so-called contemporary worship music and contemporary worship methods in the effort to remain relevant. My guest, Gus Glover, is a worship leader who is well versed in contemporary worship patterns, and he's here today to talk about some of the benefits and potential pitfalls of these methods. Welcome, Gus, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. You're a student here at ASU,
I
a
am.
senior in the communication department, and we've been lucky enough to have you over in our Department of Philosophy and Religion for a few classes. But that's only part of your life. You're a pretty busy fella. You're a worship leader with the Wesley Foundation here on campus, and you also have a really distinctive title with another church, and I'm going to read it because I couldn't quite get it down. You are the Director of Audio Production and Stage Design
That is correct.
at the Rocky Mount Church of Lake Norman. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay. So when I think of staff members at a church, I think there's a pastor and maybe a minister of music, but a Director of Audio Production and Stage Design, that's I think reflective of where we are in worship today. Can you tell me what you do in that role?
Yeah, so on a weekly basis, most of what I do is we do a lot of events at my church. So making sure that those events are set up and torn down from and for, just to make sure that everything's working like it should be. Because all of these events that we do have these expectations of this level of production that would be similar to what you would traditionally think of as a theater or some kind of music venue.
So are these events you're talking about, are they all related to worship in some way, or are they church events, or could they be community events as well?
We do both. We do several conferences. Do a women's conference, actually coming up next month, and then we do a lot of community events, especially graduations from the smaller elementary schools and middle schools in the area that don't really have an auditorium to host that kind of thing in.
Right.
So instead of doing it in their gym where you can't understand anything,
Right.
they do it in our sanctuary, which is, acoustically designed for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's what you run then, the acoustics part, the audio part.
Yeah.
So that tells me something about your worship space, right? I guess it wouldn't be a traditional space as much as a flexible space, perhaps.
Yes.
I actually pulled a couple of pictures off of the website for your church. If we can get them up on the screen, maybe talk a little bit about it. But seems like one of the features of what you're trying to achieve in a contemporary worship setting is this kind of flexibility of purpose. So this first picture here is from the back, and the first thing that stands out to me is that my old wood pews from my old church are not there. You've got these chairs, and I guess this is part of what you mean by flexibility.
Yeah, so these chairs mostly stay in place. The biggest part of the decision to do that, though, was the fact that we could be a community relief center for if there were ever a tornado or some kind of major natural disaster that came through, we could be a resource for our community if we didn't have pews.
Okay.
So that was a huge part of our decision in balancing like the tradition versus how we can benefit our community.
Right. And then the stage looks a little bit different from what I would normally expect, although the basic elements are there, pew, a pulpit, and piano, chairs, and an organ. But you got this big screen back there, so I guess that's used quite a lot, and it looks like you've got some projection on the sides there as well.
So you can't see it on the wall. This is probably the coolest thing from my perspective about our sanctuary. That entire wall can be projected on, like above the person at the pulpit,
Right.
above their head, and up to the wood on the ceiling is projectable
giant
surface.
screen.
Yes.
Let's bring the second picture up because I think that would answer my
Yeah.
question. All right, so here, this is the same stage, right?
It is.
So those aren't actual bricks. Are you projecting all of that background there? that's pretty cool. So what is this event? Do you recognize it or?
This is Vacation Bible School, I think a year or two ago. But the combination of like physical set design elements that you would traditionally think of in theater production, and then adding to that with the whole wall of projection, just makes it a whole like comprehensive experience.
So this is the sort of thing you're responsible for,
Yeah.
at least in part. That's pretty impressive, and I think So one of my questions was in the effort to create a contemporary worship space. There's something. The setting has to be a little different than what we would normally think of as a church sanctuary, and here we've got some really good examples. You configured the space so it can serve multiple functions. You've configured the space so that it is acoustically excellent, and you've configured the space so that you can get this kind of really nice multimedia presentation and stage setup. So that's really impressive there, that the whole back wall then becomes a projection screen.
Yeah.
So you're really only limited by your creativity.
Exactly, and the amount of time that we have to create that content.
Right.
Which is why, instead of just having a minister of music, as you said at the beginning, you have to have multiple people that are in charge of different areas of creativity, because, it's a lot to design a graphic for an entire wall.
That looks like a lot of work right there, yeah. So you mentioned something that goes along with it. In addition to, I'm trying to think of what are the components of contemporary worship. This flexibility of space and this highly technological use of space would be one thing. We can maybe come back to the technology in a little bit. But you also mentioned music. So we can go to the third picture, the third slide here. We've got a band here that looks like you over on the left.
It is.
I thought so, okay. So we've got, this is in the sanctuary, a bass, a couple of basses, a couple of guitars, a singer and a drummer. Looks like you're at a rock and roll venue here.
Yeah.
So does the music resemble what I would call rock and roll or rhythm and blues, or how does it differ?
So 10 years ago, when I first started doing worship music, it was very similar to like pop rock that you would find on the radio at that time or today. It was very guitar based and repetitive lyrics and simple chords and that kind of thing. But nowadays, modern praise and worship music, which I think there's a distinction to be drawn between contemporary Christian music, which is, top 40 Christian music.
That's what we hear on the radio.
Yeah, versus what I would characterize as modern praise and worship music, which is more of your like long form. You're not constrained to 3 minutes on the radio.
Right.
But the differences in the style of music, there's a lot more. You see this picture and you think, oh my gosh, they have 2 electric guitarists on stage.
Right.
But mostly one of those electric guitarists is doing like ambient soundscape, like movie score kind of things. Whereas the other guitarist is like me, that Sunday morning, I was leading from that like I would an acoustic guitar instead of, I'm not shredding guitar solos and stuff.
Yeah, so this is a pretty high level of music production here. I haven't heard y'all play, but I have heard similar bands in similar churches, and it's pretty high level. And it's different, right? It's different from what I grew up with, of course. So do you think when we talk about contemporary worship, is music the thing? Is it the main thing? Or is it one among many components? We've talked about space, we've talked about the music.
That would depend on who you ask.
Okay.
The modern contemporary Christian community is pretty divided as to how to define contemporary and worship.
Right.
So, some people would say that contemporary worship is one person standing up on stage leading Chris Tomlin songs from 2009 on an acoustic guitar.
Right.
Whereas what you see behind us would also be characterized as contemporary worship. But there's an expectation that's been put into this contemporary, as technology's evolved, as we've leaned on technology more, as we've leaned on the incredible musicianship of some of these people that are, they're just volunteers. There's become this expectation that, even if you have a church with 30 people in it, you've got to have the best music and you've got to be on par with the production value of, churches that have attendance of 2,000 or greater.
Right. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Now, your church is fairly, it's not a mega church, but it's not 30 people either, right?
Yeah.
And you're drawing from the Charlotte community, I guess, so that the expectation even gets greater,
Yeah.
right, for professional sounding music. So I think I know the answer to this, but who's the target audience here with this style of music, with the emphasis on technology and superior audiovisual production? Who are you going after? Or maybe it's not as simple as one target audience, but who would you say your target audience is?
So the target audience thing is really interesting because most of our congregation is made up of baby boomers and their families.
My age.
Yeah.
Okay.
So most people are my parents' age. That kind of demographic is what most of our church is. But if you think about it, the market of like radio Christian music is that same like soccer mom
Right.
demographic.
Right.
But it often gets lumped into this millennial thing. Like it's all about the kids,
Yeah.
which I think is because most of the people that are leading this worship, if you go back to the picture, it's mostly college students, high school students, and one or two people that have graduated from college.
Well, I would have thought for sure that your answer would have been we're targeting millennials and Generation Z or whatever the next after Z is.
Yeah.
But not so. It's a more broad spectrum than that. And I guess you could argue that you're drawing the children in of those baby boomers. But
Yeah.
do you find the baby boomers respond to this, to this style of worship? I guess so if they're coming to church there.
Well, there's also a line of like retention of the people that you have in the church versus reaching out and having new people come in. And we have several different avenues of doing that through community events, and our youth program is we've got a really good youth band as well that leans on a lot of these high school age worship leaders that are just as good as the people who are in college or graduated.
Right.
So there's always this dynamic of do you want to like cater to the people? Do you want to pander to your audience? Or do you want to like push the boundaries? And that's something that we have to deal with on a weekly basis. In a Catholic church, you don't have people coming up and requesting songs to the
Right.
priest after the service.
Right.
But in a modern Protestant church, that's a daily reality.
So there's another kind of characteristic of contemporary worship. It'd be much more informal, much more interactive, I suppose.
Yeah.
All right, so the benefits of this is that some people who may not be in church, if they don't like traditional worship, would be drawn to this. Are there any potential drawbacks to going down this contemporary worship style route?
So one of the biggest drawbacks to this is that nobody is like going through each of these songs that are being written and saying, like, this song has really deep, rich theological roots, or this song sings of one facet of God. There's no like committee that oversees this, which is a good thing in some ways, but it's also a bad thing when you combine inexperienced worship leaders, whether that's they haven't been leading worship for very long, or they're not incredibly experienced in theological understanding,
Right.
and they're being thrown up on a stage and asked to pick songs for a contemporary worship gathering, and then they pick songs that they enjoy, that sound good, that feel good to them, that don't necessarily have that theological grounding.
And you had mentioned, I think you used the word democratization earlier with me, that this sort of, on one hand, it's good to have this democratization of talent in song, but on the other hand, there's kind of a lack of uniformity, a lack of oversight, so that if I go into a Methodist church, there's the Methodist hymnal, or a Baptist church, the Baptist hymnal. And I guess these songs that make it to the hymnal have been vetted, tried and true, but not so in a setting like this, or not as much, I guess.
Yeah, so the issue is that we have these umbrellas of our denominations and our churches, but where it used to be that those umbrellas of churches would be looking at the songs that we're playing, looking at the new songs that are being written by the Gaithers, and adding those to the hymnals in revisions. But a lot of that's fallen by the wayside, as a lot of churches have been drawn into this contemporary worship thing, like full, they just jumped off the cliff into the contemporary worship world, and they've just taken the hymnal and thrown it out.
Yeah. So you hinted at something. Now, this is maybe a difficult question, but do you think there's a lack of theological depth in contemporary worship, either and I guess this is part of the democratization, either in the music or in the type of sermons that are appealing in this setting, or is that going to be kind of an individual from church to church sort of thing?
I think the issue is that there's great potential for that. You can write a great song that's amazing for the radio, or amazing for live performance, that has no theological background or theological rooting, or even worse than that, has concepts that could be considered heretical.
Right.
Which one of the issues with the democratization is that now I lead at 2 United Methodist communities, and we're playing songs from Pentecostal churches, we're playing songs from non-denominational churches, all over the world. Hillsong, Bethel, Elevation, Vertical Worship, all those kind of things are coming from different streams of Christianity that, while we read the same Bible and we believe mostly the same things, our understandings of those theological concepts are not necessarily the same.
Yeah. You mentioned something too. Now, I never really thought of this in this light anyway, but with the increasing emphasis on technology and this more contemporary music, that the workload is sort of disproportionately now moved to younger people in the church, and that the aging population in the church may be feeling left out in a sense, because there's not as many roles for them to fulfill. Is that a real dynamic that's a kind of a drawback from this style of worship?
Yeah, so with the advent of digital audio technology and the massive amount of media production that goes into a modern worship service, it's difficult for many people from older generations to catch up to that level of production. If you've still got your PC from 2013, you're not going to have any idea what's going on. when
And mine's actually older than that, but I know what you're saying, right? Yeah.
yeah, but when we stick you in front of a 2019 iMac and say, here you go, every bit of lighting, all the screens, everything is controlled from your computer. All you got to do is click one button. For someone who's not grown up in the digital age, that can be terrifying.
Well, we've got a couple minutes left. I'm going to switch gears just in the last portion here. One of your other roles is with the Wesley Foundation, and that would be purely a college age group of people, and you're leading worship there as well. And I think sometimes the so-called millennials and Generation Z kids get a bad rap as being sort of disconnected and maybe egocentric. But you enlightened me a little bit by suggesting that that's not necessarily the case, that millennials are seeking to be relevant and seeking a sense of purpose. You want to comment on that just a bit?
So I think that most millennials, Gen Z people are looking for something that they're passionate about. And I think that many people in previous generations don't understand that concept as well, because it seems like they're walking away from things when in reality they're searching for a new passion. Within the church sphere, you have people that are all over being part of worship, technology, hospitality, anything that's within the purview of the church. And these people are so gung-ho and they're ready to, just bust down the door and, change the world in what they're doing. That, the leaders are like, oh, hey, we got volunteers, yay, let's do this. And the biggest issue is that these people are getting burnt out like that.
Do you see that there's any particular avenue that is attractive to young people today? Is there any kind of cause you might put that young people are particularly motivated by, particularly in church, but maybe in a broader view in society and culture in general?
I think it's a general concept of being part of something bigger than yourself. I think church is a great way to go about that, and it gives you the opportunity to jump into that kind of world where you feel like you're a part of something greater.
All right. Well, Gus, this has been fascinating. I commend you on your hard work and encourage you to continue doing your good work, and we've got to get you back over to our department for another class or two. Thanks so much for joining us today. Well, that's it for Religion and Life for this week. I hope you'll join us next time when my guest will be Dr. Stephanie Yep, who will talk about Islam and the challenges of teaching about Islam in the State University. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwald.